Hello, my name is Max Wright, and welcome to This Week in Tyranny for November 16, 2015. And I feel like this week I should have let this one go through to Sargon of Akkad in his This Week in Stupid series, because there's a video that went viral here. It's Neil Kavutu, and it says Neil Kavutu embarrasses a student who wants free college and has no idea how to pay for it. And the interview it just highlights the economic illiteracy of the left. And this particular woman, I mean, she is the national organizer for a movement which she wants to get 1 million people marching with 3 core demands, and I'll show you what those demands are in her words in just a moment. And when Neil asks her, okay, how's that going to be paid for? What are the costs and benefits of this? There's just nothing. It's just like airy-fairy magic words. And to think that the organizer, I presume she's in college herself, probably not even in the first couple of years, probably a junior or senior, and just she's the head of this movement, and she can't actually articulate any way, shape, or form whether or not this is going to be a good thing for society, bad thing for society, without any kind of metrics, numbers, nothing valid, just fluff that is just so typical of the left. There's no content, there's no meat to anything she's saying. So let's have a look at this video.
So what do you
Totally
want here?
fine.
What do you want?
So the movement, the Million Student March, is a movement for a more equitable and fair system of education, as opposed to the really corporate model that we have right now. So the 3 core demands of the National Day of Action are free public college, a cancellation of student debt, and a $15 an hour minimum wage for people who work on the campus.
Okay, so let's work our way through these 3 demands, and we'll see just how beneficial they're going to be for society. And I'm going to really try and steer away from the moral argument because, A, it's extremely obvious. If you steal from somebody to give to somebody else, there's obviously an immoral component to that. But we are speaking to collectivists, and so they don't really care about that. So as far as they're concerned, all property belongs to the collective, and it's up to wise and benevolent leaders to allocate it efficiently. So we'll ignore the moral argument, just go straight to the practical argument. So let's start with free public college education. So it's worthwhile noting the effect of government intervention in this marketplace in the past to see if they're actually good stewards on this particular topic. So some decades ago, the government stepped in and made a couple of laws with the idea, the hope, that they were going to help students, right? It was going to make education available for everybody. It was going to be a great idea. In actual fact, obviously, it was a bill sponsored by people with lots and lots of money, and they wanted to lend it out to people in a way that they could not possibly lose, and they would actually make people debt slaves to them for decades and decades and decades. Once again, it was the mega wealthy, the 1% of the population that are actually trick the liberals into demanding the things that's actually going to ruin them. We'll see how this plays out. So the government stepped in and said, hey, young people, it's not fair. Everybody should have education available to you. What we're going to do is the government is going to guarantee all of your loans. So what that means is for the people who are lending you money so that you can go to college, right? They're not going to look at you and decide whether or not it's a good investment. They're not going to look at the marketplace and see, well, there's now so many people with college degrees that when they get out, they can't get jobs. And so this person's probably not going to be able to pay me back. So I'm not going to lend. I'm going to cut down on how many students I lend money to. Does any of this stuff take place? And the answer is absolutely not. Anybody with a buck in their pocket will happily lend money to a student because the person lending cannot possibly lose. So all of their due diligence goes out the window. Next, the next thing that happens is that virtually all debt is dischargeable during bankruptcy, except the mega wealthy people who had tricked the liberals into demanding their own demise allowed for this. What they said was student debt under no circumstances can be discharged during bankruptcy. Even if you declare bankruptcy, you are still on the hook. And remember, this was the goal the entire time, to make debt slaves of young, stupid, ignorant people. So of course, as a result of this, there is an opportunity for banks and corporations or whoever else with large sums of money to make an absolutely 100% government guaranteed return on their investment, and they can't possibly lose money. So it's just free money. So of course there's this massive advertising blitz and marketing campaigns to convince people that they need to go to college. It's extremely important. It's going to be so much more valuable for them in the future. And basically all this money pours in. Of course, you're a young student. You're 18. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, I certainly wasn't the brightest spark in the world at 18. I've obviously learned a lot since I've been in the real world since then, let's say. And college is fun as fuck. I mean, it just is. It's like someone's going to pay me to go to college and I'll have to pay them back, but I'll probably be earning twice as much money when I do, so it'll be fine. It's going to work out great. I'm going to go and have a ball. Why not? There's so much economic incentive there to get people to go to college that obviously many people do. You add to that in the 2008 financial crisis and all other crises, what happens is when jobs are scarce, it's like, well, I can either sit on my hands in a market where there's no jobs available, or I can take advantage of this easy money. I can go to college. I've now at least got money to feed myself, so that's a victory right there. And I'll get an education and still clinging onto the belief that when I come out the other end, I'll be able to get a job, have more skills, it'll be much easier for me to make by, and I'll be able to pay it off. So all these things kind of add up to just pouring large groups of people into colleges, but nonetheless they're there and they are now enslaved with debt. So now we have this problem that's caused by the government, and it's a very real problem. Let me just share some stats with you here. 40 million Americans are now in debt because of their university education. And on average, borrowers have 4 loans with a total balance of $29,000. According to the Fed, student loans have the highest delinquency rate in any form of household credit, having surpassed credit cards in 2012. Now, that is a direct result of the people lending the money not doing any due diligence on whether or not this person could possibly pay it back, because there was no economic incentive to, because the government was guaranteeing the loans. Since 2010, student debt has been the second largest category of personal debt, just after home mortgage. But with a home mortgage, you have an asset behind it. Usually the asset is worth more or very close to the debt. With a student loan, you have a piece of paper of questionable value that is just, it's all debt. People have the debt and no house. It's so tragic. The delinquency rate for student loans is now hovering near an all-time high since they started collecting data 12 years ago. Only 37% of total student loan balances are currently in repayment and not delinquent. That means 2/3 are either behind in their payments or in all-out default. And by the way, as a quick side note, just to really ramp up the tyranny here, I think it was last year there was a senator or a congressperson out of Arizona who floated a bill which said that if you have tax debt or student debt, you should not be able to have a passport. This is the new Iron Curtain. They don't have to build a wall anymore. The wall is there. You can't get on a plane or a boat or cross the border without a passport anymore. It's not like 1950s. That is gone. So all they need to do to create a wall is just prohibit you from taking a passport. And that's what they're floating. They are trying to pen the sheep in the farm, saddle them with debt, and then pen them in the farm and make them their tax slaves. That is the goal. That's what they're working towards rapidly. This woman we just met, Keely, and many more like her, they are the ones they are targeting to pen the livestock in the farm. Stage 1 is complete. They are saddled with an unbearable amount of debt. Stage 2 is coming fast. Keep an eye out for it. But here is Keely, a victim of a government program. And now, what does she want to do? She wants to demand that the government comes to her rescue and fixes the problem which it creates. Now, this stuff is really, really easy to see. It's really easy to put together if you look at it. Now, here's a girl who is completed high school education, somewhere in college education, presumably. She has been going to a government-run education system for 13, 14, 15, 16 years, something like that. And after 15 years of being in possession of the government while they educate her, quote unquote educate her, here she is, and she can't put 2 and 2 together. She runs to the people who have enslaved her and asks for their help to get her out. That's the insanity of the left. This is something that people really, really need to understand, the power of indoctrination. I've been a libertarian for 15 years, and still every now and again I catch myself saying something. Bill Burr's got a great bit on this. I just stand up like the Manchurian Candidate and espouse government somehow. I'm like, Jesus, what did I just say? How did that even make sense? But the degree to which we are indoctrinated in government-run education facilities to believe that government is the solution to all our problems is mind-blowing. So really try and watch yourself and catch yourself on this. Let's forget all about that. Fresh slate. Let's just go from now. What should we do? What's great for the country? What's good moving forward? Well, obviously there is a spectrum. There are some diminishing returns. For example, if someone were to advocate you should get free college forever and you're going to live to be 100 and you just get free college forever, well, obviously that's not good for the country. You've been taking money out of the pot to pay for your education all those years and you never got into the workforce and applied your skills. The purpose of education, when it returns on investment, when it's good for the individual, when it's good for the country, is when you're sacrificing productive years. You're not going to work and actually producing stuff. You're going to educate education, you're not producing anything, but you're raising your skill set. So you might work now for like 40 years, whereas you would have worked for 44 years if you started that 4 years earlier and didn't go to college. Well, the goal is that your higher productivity in that 40 years is more valuable than what you could have produced in the 44 years without the education. That's where there's a return on investment in education. That's when it's a good thing. So the question is that you would have to ask anybody if they're looking to, increase the number of years that people get free education, where there is some benefit to society of it, is how will you know when you've gone too far? How will you know when the return on investment is no longer there? Well, there's a pretty obvious answer to that, right? You'll know that there was a negative return on investment if you go to college, you get your degree, you come out of college, and you either get no job or you get a job that doesn't require a college degree. Now, we are there. In fact, this is one of the group's major gripes. They go to college, they get saddled with debt, they come out the other end, and there's no jobs for them. Right? So they're complaining about this very fact. So if you had any economic literacy whatsoever, if you just simple, basic supply and demand, return on investment, if you understand these terms at all, you can do a quick calculation in your head, you should know for a fact that it is not productive in this economy at this time to send this many people to college so that they can come out the other end and not benefit from the skills that they've learned. Remember, they've sacrificed up to 4 years of producing in order to get these skills that they cannot use on the job. At the very least, they can't use them now. You could make the argument that it could be done later, but then you could also make the argument, well, then you should defer your learning for later so that the return on investment is quicker. If I invest $1 and make $1 million tomorrow, that's a really good investment. If I invest $1 and make $1 million 5,000 years from now, that's not a good investment. So time is an important factor when evaluating return on investment. So at the very least, these people know full well that it is a disaster and a terrible idea to advocate putting more people through college. The nation cannot possibly have a positive return on investment from that. The next thing she asked for, cancellation of student debt. Now, what she really means here is for the taxpayer to pay for her debt. That's what she's actually saying. Let's talk about cancellation of debt for a second, because I think that's a little bit more interesting. What we all agree on occurred is that government stepped in and said, businesses out there, we will guarantee these student loans, so you don't need to worry about doing any due diligence, you don't need to make any assessment on the value of this market, just lend money like it's going out of style. They did, and if you come back now and say, we're going to cancel the debt, the students don't owe you anymore, then the government has committed a crime. It's a breach of contract. The government has failed these businesses, and that's completely immoral. Now, we all agree that took place. What is somewhat a little bit more conspiratorial is that the corporations bribed the politicians to sell the taxpayer out and guarantee these loans. Now, if you could prove beyond a reasonable doubt that crime took place, now you would have a reasonable argument. The taxpayers would have a reasonable grievance to where they could exit that part of the contract. It's like, no. We clearly got screwed there. Here's the evidence. We're not being on the hook and paying these corporations on behalf of these students. If that took place, if the government said, no, I am not going to be the muscle of the banks, I'm not going to go and steal money from the taxpayers and give it to you on behalf of these things. If that took place, then what would happen, I mentioned earlier that it's like 2/3 of loans are in default. What would happen is that debt would be liquidated. Meaning, let's say, what would happen is that they'd get bundled up and they'd get sold. And so let's say there's a bank there and there's one particular person, they have $29,000 in student debt. They haven't paid in a year. What will happen is that debt will be sold to somebody. And someone will buy that debt for, say, $5,000. And a person will ring up and say, hey, student who owes me $29,000, I just bought your debt. You owe me $29,000. It's going to mess with your credit file. It's going to inhibit your ability to make investments and do things in the future. And I'm sure you're a good person. You actually do want to pay off the debts that you promised that you would pay off. How about this? How about you start making payments today? We'll come up with a plan that you can afford, and you'll pay back $7,000 over the next 3 years. And if you can do that, I'm not going to mark your credit. I'm going to say that the loan was paid in full, and everyone's a winner. How about that? So you would see a significant reduction in the burden on students if that took place. And I think that would be morally just if you could prove beyond a shadow of a doubt, or beyond a reasonable doubt, that the crime took place. So that is an interesting concept and something to play with for people. But Keely's solution is to, no, get somebody else to pay for my debt. Yeah, she started off by saying she wants a more fair and equitable system. It doesn't sound very fair or equitable to get somebody else to pay for a commitment that she made. There's nothing fair or equitable about that in any way, shape, or form. The third demand of the Million Person March is a $15 per hour minimum wage. I feel like I have to talk about the minimum wage every week. It's becoming such a hot topic. Please, people, please share this video, share my other videos, share other videos on the minimum wage. Let's annihilate this myth. It is so destructive and it is so disastrous for poor people. We can agree, I think, that everybody has some economic value. You know, I might be worth $10 per hour, you might be worth $20 per hour, that guy over there might be worth $30 per hour, and it all depends on their level of skills, their level of education, and even some natural born factors. Like if you're a supermodel, you're just born smoking hot, you know, you might be worth $1 million an hour. Whatever it is, but we all have some economic value. And that economic value falls on something that looks like a bell curve, you know, over the population. So there is some portion of the population that is way down on the left-hand side of that bell curve, and they are worth $3 an hour, $4 an hour, $5 an hour, $10 an hour, whatever it is, but they are worth less than $15 an hour. Now, let's pause and stop there as I always do. If you went to a government-run school from, say, K through 10 to 11 years or K through 12, 13 years, you are in the possession of a government-run school and you come out the other end and you can barely read, you are illiterate, you have no math skills, that person has been screwed by the government. It's very, very crystal clear that they were screwed by the government took by force their parents' money and the money of other parents. They said, we're going to provide education. We're so confident we're going to do it well. We're going to take your money by force. If you don't agree, we're going to throw you in jail. So you better send me your check at the end of the year to the IRS. The money was taken by force. The government said they will provide the service, and they failed miserably. So if for the people who are in that situation, or for the people who want to help the people who are in that situation, that people graduate high school and they are just functionally illiterate, for the love of God, stop asking government to fix the problem. You asked government to fix a problem. That was no problem because the free market education system that existed before the government got involved was fantastic and worked very, very well. And there was some reports say that there was less than 4 people in 1,000 who were illiterate. Now the figure's up to 30, 40%. All right. So stop asking the government to fix the problem that the government created. Admit that you were wrong and say, government, can you please step out of it and we'll get back to healing the educational system that is so broken and corrupt. But what's done is done. Government education has inflicted the wounds that it's inflicted, and we have millions of kids turning 18, entering the workforce, and they are near worthless economically through no fault of their own. And I'm not saying it's because character or anything like that. Because the education system screwed them, they are now of very little value. So at this point, what are their options? Let's go through them. Number 1. What we could do is we can say, sorry guys, you aren't educated enough. You didn't acquire the skills to be economically productive. What we're going to do is we're going to give you free government education. Come and do some more education with us. We did such a good job for the first 13 years of your life. Let's invest another 4 years from the same people and we'll get it right this time, I promise. I hope I don't need to say how ridiculous that is as a solution. Now, what's their other alternative? Well, they could recognize that what I need is skills and education and training. This is what I need in order to be more productive. What's a great place to learn that is on-the-job training. So why don't I go out and get the best job I can with the highest pay I can, even if it's way below a living wage. I can't possibly, I'm going to suck it up. I'm going to live with my parents for a year or 2 or 3. I'm going to do what I've got to do. It's going to be hard, but I had this thing inflicted on me by the government, and now I need to just do what I've got to do. I'm out of their clutches finally. Let me just go and seek refuge in the free market and try and get some skills that way. What the minimum wage law does is it destroys that person's recourse to claw their way out of the disaster that they found them in. Just through no fault of their own, they were innocent victims, and now the minimum wage law, there's another government intervention, is going to trap them there. And they get all the psychological damage of long-term unemployment, generational unemployment, and it's a disaster. Now, this isn't airy-fairy. There's an incredible body of research to back this up. It's a fantastic video on YouTube by black economist Thomas Sowell, who talks about how the minimum wage has just been devastating for the black community. Please go and check that out. Educate yourself before you start advocating this shit, because it is so disastrous. But you should be able to know this anecdotally. You remember a few decades ago, there were all these companies moving their manufacturing to China, and they were paying people, $5 a day with no toilet breaks. And the leftists were up in arms, right? So, boycott these companies, don't let them go over there. Again, they wanted to cut off the lifeline that these poor people had. These people were living for $2 a day, right? And so a company came in and said, we'll give you $3 a day. And these people voluntarily took on this situation, right? And they were useless. The reason they were useless is because Mao spent decades educating them that he was a god. He didn't bother teaching them how to read and write and think. What he spent his time doing was educating the population that he was a god and that everyone should obey him, right? That was a government-run education system again. The people come out the other end completely worthless. And once again, the people say, there's no minimum wage in China, thank God. And within a handful of decades, right, people step in and say, I'll work for $2 a day, I don't care what it is, I'm starving, I can't think for myself, teach me how to operate this sewing machine and I will bust my ass and I'll get going. A few years later, that guy's now earning $3 an hour because he's managing a group of people on the sewing machines. 2-3 decades later, and China has seen hundreds of millions of people lifted up out of poverty by the very thing that all the leftists said, you should boycott, you should abort, whatever you do, don't support these companies, they're paying slave wage rates and all this nonsense. An entire generation was destroyed by Mao's education policy, exactly the same situation that's happening in America. The free market stepped in and did a great job of rebuilding this disaster, and rather than acknowledging it, saying thank you, celebrating it, and emulating the recovery from the disaster, now leftists want to double down and prohibit the market from fixing the disaster that the government caused again. So all three of the things that this movement is demanding is an absolute disaster, not only for the country, but also for the people demanding it, especially for the people demanding it. But their economic illiteracy is so bad, they can't join those dots. And this is really highlighted throughout the rest of this interview. Check it out.
And how's that going to be paid?
Great question. I mean, so I'm not sure if you're talking on like a national level or at particular schools. I can sort of touch on both. At my university, Northeastern University,
someone asked to pick up the tab. Who would that be?
The 1% of people in society that are hoarding the wealth and really sort of causing a catastrophe that students are facing. I mean, we have a relationship right now where 1% of the population owns more wealth than the 99% combined.
All right, so if the 1%, Keely, if the 1% just had their taxes raised a few years ago back to almost 40%, then to pay for the health care law, they had them raised another few percentage points. Then they had their deductions limited to raise another couple points, where, depending on the state or locality, they're pushing over about 50% in taxes. How much higher do you think? How much more do you think they should pay?
I think enough until we have a system where not 1 in 2 American families are threatened with poverty.
So where do they go? Let's say if you tax them, they're smart folks, these people, these 1% hoarders, right? So if they leave here, then who's going to pay for all this stuff that you want?
If they leave
the country.
I mean, there's always going to be a 1% in the U.S. The U.S. is like the bastion of capitalism and its success.
Basically saying America will always have rich people to steal from because it's a capitalist society. But when you steal from them, it ceases being a capitalist society. In the same breath, she's celebrating capitalism. She seems to believe, and I would agree with her, that the reason there's so much wealth in America is because of capitalism. But she hasn't joined the dots that what she's doing is destroying capitalism.
I come from an incredibly working class family, and my family is already on numerous forms of government assistance and is basically scraping by, in order to get me through college. I live in a world and I see a system around me where there's a population that's doing nothing to contribute to the progression of society. Education is really the only way that we have innovation, that we have.
Keely, I'm sure you sound very smart. You know what's going on. You mentioned what's going on in the world. You're probably aware what's happening in Greece and these other countries that provided all these benefits and then some, many of which you outlined very nicely here for us today. And they're going broke and they're out of money. And they don't know what to do. And their people are rioting on the streets because they can't believe the money's gone and the benefits and the promises are gone.
Right.
What do you think?
I mean, there's a global catastrophe right now of complete defunding of social services and
because
defunding
they ran out of money.
Public,
you know what happened, Keely? They just ran out of money. right?
I understand, but there is a 1% in Greece. There's a 1% in the United States. There's a 1%. There's a ruling class in absolutely every.
I don't doubt there is, Kelly. I don't doubt there is, but obviously they've been trying to tap them and get money from, and they realize either they don't have the money or they hid from the money, or they're gone. They're
always be a 1%. There's someone's gonna. I can list off stuff that I want forever. There's always going to be a 1%. Well, in some respects, the statement is technically true. There always will be a 1%. And the question is, how much money do they have to pay for the shit she wants? And this concept, it's just back to the collectivist thing. It's not that it's theirs. It's not that they worked really hard for it. She sees a world where she looks out the window and no one's doing anything to make anything better. Well, I mean, as long as there's a 1%, and there'll always be a 1%, she feels entitled to whatever it is that they have for stuff for her. I mean, she said she came from a welfare family. I don't want to slag off on that, but there's a connection here. Like, I think everyone can join the dots in that you grow up in a culture where there's someone else is responsible for paying for me. I mean, why would you expect the child to grow up and she should expect to pay for herself?
Do you think any of those guys, any of those administrators, any of those schools aren't going to leap at the opportunity to gouge even more, to raise tuitions even more, to raise room and board even more?
Well, I mean, ideally, if we have a big enough mass movement of people in the streets, we can actually prevent things like that from happening.
If only we get enough people to march, then all of the negative consequences, which are perfectly obvious to anyone with a scrap of economic literacy, well, none of them will take place because there's enough people marching. Fuck.
But even if you were to take the 1% and take all of their money, tax it 100%, do you know that couldn't keep Medicare, just Medicare in this country, going for 3 years? Did you know that?
If we're to a point where the rich is paying 100% on their taxes, then we're on the road to socialism, and we're going to have a completely different type of public infrastructure.
No. What do you say to that? What do you say to that? If we're at the point where people are getting taxed 100%, if the government takes everything off of everyone, then we're on the road to socialism. And she says it as if it's a bad thing. It's like, no, we don't want to go to socialism. Socialism's bad. Everyone knows that. But, yeah, we should at least go to 100% tax. What the fuck? It just always just comes back to the economic illiteracy of these fucking people is mind-blowing. This right here is just the number one reason why the power of government has to be reduced at all costs. Because fucking idiots like this get to vote. Earlier in the video, she spoke positively of capitalism. Just now, she spoke negatively of socialism. But she's advocating socialism with every breath she takes. She's the most confusing person ever. And this, above anything else, this is why people really need to wake up. Is like, this is why you can't have a powerful government. Look, let's look at what government is. If you can convince, this is what government is in its best, most purest form, with no corruption, right? If you can convince 51% of the people to advocate that men with guns walk around and steal shit, take things, make rules, force people to do whatever, force people to do things that they want. If you can get 51% of people to do it, then it becomes law and we should do it. And if you don't comply with the mob, then men with guns will come and force you to comply with the mob or throw you in jail. Throw you in a cage, take away your freedom. People often say, well, because people are greedy, but because people are corrupt, you have to have a government or else greedy corporations do X. No, because there are greedy people, because there are stupid people, because there are people who want something for nothing, you can't have a government. It's the other way around. The most terrifying thing is, this girl will probably get her 1 million person march. There are that many people who look up to how eloquently she spoke that they said, yeah, we're going to go and march on the street for this. This is the creme de la creme. This is an organizer of this huge movement. This person gets on Fox News. This doesn't terrify you.